Welcome to On the Spot. I'm Thomas Wasson, filling in for Tony, joined by Zack Strickland. A lot of stuff going on, a lot of stuff going on the spot. Haha, a little pun going there. But let's get going. One of my things to talk about is The Big Short, because you know what? I have not mongered enough fear today. My fear level is not full. My cup hath not runneth over, and it's time to look at my favorite thing called how to make sure your brokerage lane goes underwater. We'll start though with contracted rates. Now, if you're a young aspiring broker and you finally got that RFP and you know what the word EDI means, congratulations, you're in the top 20%. I'm proud of you. But your issue is right now, as bid season goes on, you could be pricing it low. And I know you'll tell me that we always bought at $800 and my $900 lane will work, but dear friend, a reckoning is a-coming. And this is why I'm bringing on Zack, because there is a fear from a pricing perspective as we are moving into from the doldrums to the less doldrums, that your lane that was $800 may now potentially lose you money.
Yeah, I think we're in a deflationary environment and movement isn't actually that bad from a rate brokerage perspective. When you're talking about volatility and changes in pricing, what you're trying to do in that game, of course, is to make sure you're on the right side of the equation. And what you're referring to, of course, is a situation where they're on the wrong side. So if rates are moving up, and we're talking about contract rates here, once they move above and below spot at times, or I should say spot moves above and below. So you want to make sure that your spread, because if you're pricing and you have a contract carrier in place for a certain lane on that managed transportation side of things, and you have an opportunity to cover it on the spot market, right now, there's a chance you're going to have a margin.
Yeah.
But that time may be coming to an end.
And that's one thing to look at, because we're going to take it over the next chart. Forecasts and expectations. So in a typical environment, when spot rates are low or consistently at the bottom, margins compress because carriers and other brokers are jockeying for the best favorable position. If it's not the fact that the carrier is trying to get more money, it's the fact that another broker is trying to undercut you or another carrier nowadays. And so one thing that I really wanted to highlight, as well as we're hearing more talks about companies like Convoy and digital brokerages, is not only are there headwinds from your financing and receivables side coming in terms of getting paid in cash flow, but there is another concern that when you make a deal, an agreement for a year-long rate, and let's say $1,000, that $1,000 may work over here. You buy a truck for $900, your margin that you run your whole brokerage off of is $100. I know, it's a great industry, by the way. No one thought about that. But as rates move up in the next 6 months, they will eventually, because enough carriers will quit. And just like, the tale as old as time, that's when the concern comes, because you have the fear of a cascading ripple effect, as not only the brokerages either exit if they didn't get their portfolio correct with a customer mix, or that's going to go back up to bid, and other carriers are repricing it, and you may not get it back. Zack, looking at that from a standpoint, you've been involved in RFPs, you've been involved in bids. What are some of the things you think about in terms of long term, if this is the right rate for this long of a time period?
Yeah, I think when you're talking about the environment we're in, I think, shippers, brokers that are trying to get capacity right now aren't necessarily having a hard time. You can go out and get a truck just about any time you want at this point. The hard part when you get into this long game, when you're talking about long-term pricing for the next 12 months, so say you go out and you get a rate, like you said, $1,000. Well, the market appears to be, if you look at the NTI here, pretty close to a trough or a floor. We've had a pretty stable spot market so far, which means carriers have stopped bidding against each other as aggressively. They've decided, you know what? I'm not going to haul the freight, instead of, trying to compete to get something that loses money, because these rates more than likely lose money at this point. So if you lock in a rate in this market at this point in time, and it is close to this spot rate threshold, you're more than likely going to be disappointed later in the year next year, because even if we have economic, turmoil, things go into a recession, capacity exits are going to happen at a faster rate because we've been in such a long cycle. Normal freight cycles, 12 to 18 months. Obviously, we're not in a normal period of time, but that's the risk next year, is that once the market kind of reconciles itself, these rates are going to start to rise. And if you've locked in at a floor, you're now underwater and you're not going to be able to cover it.
And that's the biggest thing to watch for, because even with line haul rates, looking at spot market movements, removing a fuel surcharge, this is below the operating costs of most carriers. I would say 90 to 95% of all carriers, because there's always one guy who's like, well, I paid off my own truck, I don't have any costs. Well, good for you, friend. After 5 years, statistically, you'll be in shop for 30 days on average. Learned that from a large trucking CEO person. But Zack, to Zack's point, this is one thing I do like to highlight, is because a lot of these brokerages are also staffed with individuals and salespeople that don't understand this concept. They finally get access, they finally get in with this customer, it gives them a chance. And if you're a shipper, the flip side is you got to be very concerned, because this new broker you let in, your routing guide, may crap out on you halfway through, and now you've lost a quarter of it because they're sending back these lanes.
Yeah, I think that's also obviously a huge risk over the next year. What if your carrier, transportation service provider is one of these brokers / carriers that leave the market? That obviously has happened, unfortunately, to a lot of Convoy's customers lately, but that's the reality of the environment we're entering. We are going into a space where we have no certainty around the supply side of the equation. Demand side normally is the one that we're concerned about in terms of volatility, because we have a relatively stable supply side. But the supply side moving forward over the next 12 months, regardless of economic conditions, is extremely volatile.
And that's why we see, going back here, why is it that contracted rates have also kind of stayed a little bit stable? We're still seeing declines, but very little. It's because of the supply side. We're in a supply situation. Even the ATA admitted that it is a supply-driven problem. There's too many trucking companies. All y'all are still in business. And here's the best part. We don't know when yet the pendulum turns and that equilibrium shifts, because there's still too much supply, and it's unprecedented.
Yeah, and of course, we do expect the contract rates to keep falling because they're still elevated above spot rates. And again, you bid on the low end, next year rates go up, you have a situation that we saw in COVID.
Exactly. So Zack, thank you so much for this segment for On the Spot. Folks, you want to check out our stuff as well. Check out our research team. Great stuff going on as well. Going to go over to a quick break, but don't worry. You may see me and Zack again in the next segment. Be right back.